life, we get to a point where William Marshall, going to these tournaments, he eventually felt out of place. See, he was still using the heraldry, or he was still using the identification of William of Tankerville, but he no longer belonged there. He no longer lived there. So now he needed a sense of belonging, a place to call his own. And so what William Marshall did is he sought out his uncle, which his uncle's name was Patrick. And Patrick was the Earl of Salisbury. And the position of an earl was very, very well endowed itself. Because in all of medieval Europe, one thing that people like to call their society, the way they governed their social life, was the feudal system. The feudal system is basically a way of talking about the politics and the way the laws were passed in medieval Europe. However, the feudal system is actually a very bad term to use, simply because it gives that very broad sense that everything worked the same everywhere else. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. However, one thing that did persist from France to Germany to England to all the countries, to Spain and Portugal, all the countries of medieval Europe, was the vassalage system. And the vassalage system is what Charlemagne had started. And that was basically, let's see, if we can get, say, 12 volunteers. This is good. So you haven't had a chance, you young lady. Hold on, you. Let's see, how many does that make so far? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. You want to come up? Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so who wants to be king? Or you raise your hand first so you get to be king. Alright, everybody stand at that side. Okay? Okay, so you stand right over here. So this individual's the king. Now under the king, he had a duke. So who wants to be the duke? So you want to be the duke? Okay, so you can come over here, that's alright. So she would be the duke, so you stand right here. Okay? Now, under the duke, you would have an earl. So if I can have two people. Okay, so you and you. Okay, so these two come up. Okay? So as you can see so far, we have the king. Now the king has under him several dukes, but we'll just put one in this instance for our example. Under a duke would control a large amount of territory. They would oversee a lot of territory, so land that knights owned and operated, knights that were under them, the duke was ultimately responsible for. But the duke couldn't be everywhere at once. So the duke had earls under him, or under her. Okay? So now these earls, they are covering a smaller portion of territory, but they still need help. They still cannot be everywhere at once. So what happens is under this earl, we have you two young gentlemen stand on this side, right here. So this way, okay? And so these two individuals will be barons. And you two individuals stand over here. So you two will be barons. So we have the king, we have the duke, we have earls. Under the earls, we have more barons. So these two barons, all four of these barons can oversee all the land under the earls. There you go. Sorry, I'm starting to get confused. All right. So you two young ladies, you would stand here, here. Okay. So under these barons oversaw a very small portion of land, and each baron could have maybe 5 or 10 knights under them. So through this pyramid system, you could say, it was called the vassalage system. So you had your knights at the very bottom of the table, then you had your earls, you had your knights, then you had your barons, then you had your earls, then you had your dukes, and then you had the king lastly. So through that whole process, the vassalage system that operated at the time of medieval Europe, throughout all the centuries, that certainly existed from country to country to country. And we can call it the vassalage system because everybody used it. So thank you all for your help. Yes, they sure did. They were enacted. They were given responsibilities above just being an knight, depending on what format they were able to get into. William Marshall actually moves up into the scope of things as we get into. The first time what? That would have been in the early 9th century. So the early 800s, when knights used horses in battle, which they usually primarily did. Knights did not want to get off their horses. They did not want to fight on foot. The advantage was from horseback. You see, when we were talking about the expensive knights, knights needed to have several war horses. Because if a knight only had one horse, and that horse got tired, the knight could no longer charge forth in battle. But if a knight had several war horses, and he charged forth into battle, and he came back and he got on a fresh new horse, he could charge right back in, just as he did the first time. So, to that aspect, yeah, knights primarily used horses in battle. Now, as we move through things with William Marshall, as he assisted his Uncle Patrick, the Earl of Salisbury, he was moving up in the food chain, you could say. He was moving up through the vassalage system, now serving under an earl. Now, the Earl of Salisbury, Patrick was escorting the Queen of England, which was Henry II's wife. He was escorting her to a particular destination. Through that escort, an ambush ensued, and Patrick, the Earl of Salisbury, was killed. William Marshall quickly got the Queen to protection, to safety, charged forth back to fight over his Uncle Patrick, over his dead body. When he did this, he killed 6 other knights. That much is known. He was quickly surrounded by 10 knights, and then he was overtaken. Now, a knight being killed and stricken from behind, in the back, was a very dishonorable thing. It was so dishonorable that they could be taken to prison, they could be killed over, they could be executed. Did they get away with it? They sure did. So, being a knight was always a very tricky thing. You could suffer the long arm of the law of the king, and you may not. It just kind of depended if you got away with it or not. Now, William Marshall was captured. The Queen of England sent word back, and she traded 4 hostages, 4 knights, in exchange just for William Marshall. So William Marshall was held in very high regards in her mind. He saved her life. He went back and he still fought. He could have ran away. He could have been okay himself, but he still fought back for the proper reasons. So this brought William Marshall into the house of the king himself. Through this process, William Marshall developed a very wonderful relationship with the king. He took care of the king's son, which was called Henry the Younger. He developed a very good relationship with Henry the Younger. And as we move through, we'll go ahead and skip through a few portions. At one point, Henry the Younger was in a castle and William Marshall was away. This is getting into the mid-12th century. And at this point, Henry the Younger, his castle was getting attacked. He sent word back to William Marshall. And when William Marshall heard about this, he rode back as fast as he could. And along the way, as he's riding to his very close, you can say, associate, the prince, Henry the Younger, along the way he saw a monk and a woman. And we're going to talk a little bit about monks in a moment. But he saw a monk and a woman, and monks were not supposed to be married to women. So William Marshall saw this fact, and he told the woman, he said, I know who you are, I know where your family is, they're along the route that I'm going, jump on my horse, I'm going to take you there. So the woman said, no, I'm staying with this man. William Marshall asked the monk further, he said, well, how do you plan to take care of yourselves? How do you plan to pay for your clothing, your food, and so on? Well, the monk said, look, I have this personal money, and I'm going to loan it out to people, and when they pay me back, they're going to pay me an interest. You know, like credit cards today. Everybody kind of know the way credit cards work? Get you in a lot of trouble. And so this form of lending money in exchange and taxing it was called usury back then. And usury was